Good evening, folks, and welcome to tonight's Master Plan Update Steering Committee meeting. Mike, would you lead us to the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Sure.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks. Okay, folks, tonight we're going to approve our minutes from October 20th and November 3rd. We'll update on the Master Plan Consultant Selection Subcommittee, an RFP update, and then a review of the 2002 Master Plan document. So I'll take a motion on the minutes.
Accepted as read.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the minutes of October 20th and November 3rd. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Thank you. Okay, Master Plan Consultant Selection Subcommittee update. Maren, we've got a complete membership now,
Yes.
and I'd like to thank our town moderator, Tim Goddard. He's very graciously agreed to be on that subcommittee with us. So thank you, Tim. Our first meeting is December 1st. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And which room? TBD? Those public quizzes, I apologize.
To be determined.
To be determined, okay.
Yes.
All right, we'll get that. All right, while we're on that, folks, a thought occurred to me. When I started thinking about the week of November 23rd, and November 23rd is the date that the proposals are due to us. The folks that are going to be on the selection subcommittee, I'm kind of trying to get a feel if we really think we're going to spend the time on Thanksgiving week to read them after they arrive. So that would mean Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, it's the long weekend. And absent that commitment, and if Bonnie's able to accommodate, I'm inclined to let that go to the 30th of November. At 11 a.m., it would be due. The subcommittee would meet the evening of the 1st, so in essence a business day and a half later, to begin the process. What are your thoughts on that?
Fine with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
When you want to meet again?
No, not us meeting.
Yeah.
I'm saying we would push off the proposal due date from 23
Got it.
of November to 3rd of November.
Yep.
All right, so please check with Bonnie, and absent any conflict there, go ahead and issue a correspondence to those who have bid, and then I imagine we got to do some things on the state bid list and everything too, or whatever there.
That's a good question for Bonnie. I'll check
Yeah.
with her.
I'm anticipating we'd have to do something like that, because maybe just because they didn't show up and haven't said anything to us, they may well have the proposal or not. They would have, does anybody have the proposal? They had to come through you?
They had to go through Jen.
Okay, Jen.
Right.
All right.
And we can send it out to everybody that's officially on that list.
And then we'll put it on our website and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Has any other amendments gone out on the current RFP?
No.
No, they're due to be posted on Friday.
Okay, so we can just include it at that time, an indication of the change in date.
Yeah.
And we'll hit those, the three questions and the proposed responses with them on the RFP update.
And if it turns out that, for whatever reason, Bonnie et al. Cannot accommodate this change in schedule, we fall back.
Yes. With the level of commitment we just described. Well, we're always enthusiastic. Okay, RFP update. Karen, would you tell everybody where we're at right at this moment?
Oh, certainly. We had 3 questions submitted before Friday's deadline, and I have draft responses prepared, so if you have any comments on those draft responses, please let me know. I'll be putting the responses together in final form Thursday, so we can post them and email them out on Friday. There's copies available on the table.
Of the questions?
And the responses, you have those.
Okay, so, yeah, we gotta get them out to everybody. There's only 3 of them, so you know what I'd like to do, folks? Since Marilyn has given you a hard copy, let's go take a couple minutes and look at those questions and the responses that Marilyn has put together, and see if you have any thoughts. And maybe we put this to bed tonight, how about that?
Yeah.
Cool.
You may recall what we agreed to is Maren would indeed draft and absent policy or something of substance that between she and I, we'd release them back. But there's only these three, we got the time right this moment, so your thoughts are certainly appreciated.
Are they going to be attached to the RFP, or
Ask that again, please.
are they going to be attached as an annex or addendum?
Myron will email these out to all the prospective
Oh,
bidders
okay.
so that they have them. So the question's been asked, even if it was only one organization that asked the question, we send it out to
Yeah.
everybody. So in essence, while not truly being an attachment to the RFP, so questions asked and answered.
Okay.
Did you update this hard copy from the EDC piece?
No, I didn't.
Where it says the EDC still needs to be tracked down, Marin's already tracked that down, so.
Have you already read this?
Yes, I have it. I know you have it, that's why you have it.
Oh, I thought you were talking to me, so I stopped reading it until it's deep
Okay,
talking.
well done. Appreciate that.
So another question, wouldn't it be interesting if we attach for historical purpose to understand at least what is missing in our RFP? Just in.
Okay, I'd see your point. Yeah.
I really don't know the process, so I'm going to have to work with Bonnie on how to make it happen.
Nothing stops you from doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't miss a lot actually, but just.
Yep, I'll find out what the proper procedure is for it and make that happen.
On the first question, the documents we referenced in the RFP are not all on our own site. Some are on the Mpusc site, and some are on our website. Is that correct? Shouldn't they all be in the same one place?
Yeah, if we, in a perfect world with plenty of staffing, that's right. But where it's already posted on the master plan webpage, and it's all on the town website.
Okay. Well, in one place, just one
Mhm.
place, whatever that one place should be.
I mean, should you create just a link in the page for the other links? Wouldn't be difficult to do that?
The RFP says you can find them on the town website.
I see your point. On the other hand, two places is two places. It's not like we're asking them to go to 12 places.
We could be in the response. It talks about going to another place with the sewer committee.
Right,
site.
and I don't have access to that.
Well, that's under the selectmen page, right, isn't it? Should be found there.
No, it's a separate website. That's the Village Common Sewer
Yeah.
website, that's a separate website, it's not under
Okay, all right.
anything.
But the report they submitted to the selectmen should be also a matter of public record through the selectmen website.
Right, and that's available on
Okay.
the Littleton Commerce, as stated here, the sewer feasibility study report. It's on, they have a committee webpage, like we do,
Mhm.
and they have several things linked from them.
I just appreciate the challenges of trying to find something, and they're gonna want, a contractor who may or may not know the town very well, but just, even myself, you don't know where to find something.
Right, but when we send this out, the links will be active.
We'll be telling them, I agree. But for homogeneity and for reference later, it would be better if any of the common documents we want them to build off of were all in a single place, preferably
I agree.
on, if the RFP says go to the website for the town, that's probably where they should be. Or maybe the RFP should reference or that they are, what is directed to the Mpusc
Let's just-
website with links to the town.
We all agree one place is certainly the optimum. And any single task is easy. It's just there's a lot of single tasks that go on in the town hall each and every day. Different people have some different permissions. We only have one IT person servicing the town hall. So let's just, within the means that are available to Maren, if it can be done before these answers go out, we'll do that. If not,
Okay.
at the very least. Fair enough?
Yep.
All right, thanks.
On number 3,
First up, before,
Yep,
anybody
okay.
on number 2? Okay, go ahead, please.
Number 3, the question is asking, what is meant by the leaving the town with contingency and implementation funds? In the response, I think what we're doing here is we're implying that there is money that we think we're going to spend, and the implication is that those total funds spent will be somewhat short of the total appropriation, and that the leftover is what's going to be left over for contingency and implementation. Is that my interpretation correct?
Yeah.
Okay. My only point is that it's implied, it's not explicit. Do we want to tighten the language up to say, the total costs that we expect to spend are $187,000, we have $213,000 allocated, which leaves us an expected contingency of approximately $26,000? I don't care, I'm just pointing out that it's implicit right now, not explicit. I'm not,
No, no,
I
no.
don't find it a huge problem, but that when I read this is what I see.
It can reduce an ambiguity. Do this, because what you said sounds good.
Mhm.
Type Maren,
I can do that.
and then,
And you
Okay.
can feel free to smith it to incorporate it in the context of your answer is fine.
Sure. And that itself presumes for one outside survey, scientific survey?
That's what's implied here, or that's what's cited here, and that's what I use for my math. You know, and that's why I'm saying approximately 26,000. We might decide to take some of that for other purposes as we go through the process, and then the contingency would be reduced. But, and then that's up to us.
Yeah, that is.
and what is driving it, don't spend the entire sum.
Right.
You know, when you put your bid together, just because that's what we go to town meeting, doesn't mean you want to spend the full amount. It's a bit of a break, too, on how much is spent.
I don't think before we've highlighted the appropriations that were made in the RFP. so.
If any of those folks are doing their job, they'll
They know the number. Okay, any other or any other comments or suggestions on those 3 questions? Well, I would like, to Renato's point about, it looks like the RFP was well done. I'd like to thank the RFP Subcommittee, and then certainly folks on town staff that helped out there, because certainly we had few questions, and more were in general terms when we had the briefing. So the substance seems to have been covered, and evidenced by these 3 questions, at least through tonight. Of course, not tomorrow morning, watch what happens at deluge. But at least through right now, we seem to be approaching genius. So the subcommittee and town staff, thank you.
definitely.
Never getting there.
Approaching, remember. What's the Chinese proverb? Journey 1,000 miles begins at one step, so we're approaching it, and we've taken the first step on that. Okay, Mr. Glady, it seems it was your brilliance that thought a good thorough review of the 2002 plan would be a good idea. So what I'd like from you, please, some suggestions on how you may like us to approach this as a committee.
Twofold, and maybe we can get part of this done tonight, and this is my suggestion anyway, and maybe address another piece of it at another night. I think it's, in looking at this again for the first time in quite a while, kind of a 10,000-foot view of the structure of it. Is this what we want? Are we, if we got something that looked like this in form back, is that what we're looking for or not? Both, from the table of contents level, and then within each section, how it's divided down. I mean, a lot of it does contain historical detail, and, it's useful, but how much of that is filler and how much of that is actionable? And then right to the other end, at the end of each section, there are indeed action items, but I think, especially for the second part, the bore down into the details end, I think we would be well served to see on that level how well we did based on whatever the recommendations were 13 years ago, and, you know, how much of that happened and why, so that we could be educated there as to whether or not we want to make sure certain things happen to make sure that this iteration's recommendations are actually acted on.
Good, thank you. A big caution that we don't want to go down the rabbit hole too deep on grading how specific town departments, committees, or boards applied what's in there, because that'd take us forever.
Yeah, I think we could get by grabbing examples as we go through it, rather than every line.
And maybe along the lines of, we see something in there that when really our collective thoughts, at least this evening, would go like, I can see how we didn't get there. We don't have the resources.
Yeah.
So that becomes a critique to mention.
Yeah, by that, I hope I didn't imply that I'm looking to say, well, who didn't do their job? No,
No,
this is
I
more
didn't
like...
mean that at all.
Yeah, okay. And,
Are you all content with Paul's approach?
Yeah.
All right, Paul, why don't you lead us off?
afraid you're going to say that. All right.
And we also have it up on the board, too. And
Right.
if you want to, take us, when you go to a page, reference the page and paragraph. So we
Okay.
can keep up with you, please.
All right, well, then I would suggest everybody start at the table of contents, which is prior to the first of the numbered pages, and see how, closely, it does mirror our RFP, and it looks like it does in large measure, and of course, the subtopics are all those that are listed in statute. Is that right, Myron? So that's pretty much an exact iteration of what the statute says, although, as we indicated in prior discussion, there's nothing that binds us to follow that rigidly, so we're open to do whatever we want. Frankly, we don't have to include all those items, and we can order them however we want. We can add others. So I don't know if right off the bat anybody has any thoughts on that, but I think the list we adopted in our RFP already deviates from that somewhat.
We've added a few elements. We've added governance, sustainability, and some other things. I think those are the two main things we've added as chapters.
I think it's inclusive for this, with additive, as you say, Gary.
Yeah, I think my one thing maybe this is to kind of bring it up or not, but it's not reader friendly. The current document. I mean, it could be an error of the time of the graphics.
Yep.
I just see. You look at this and you don't want to read it because you know it's going to be somewhat of a burdensome task.
That's a real good comment to make to the winner, or even if they're listening now. At least we have an idea of how we'd like not to see it.
It's very black and white, and I'm not looking for USA Today, but something a little bit more in terms of presentation that's a little more eye-catching and.
Do you remember
easy to
Melissa's
read.
comments when we saw Westford's?
I did not know.
Okay, Westford is from what you're describing here, and I think I'd go on the limb and say it, very user-friendly, very graphic intensive, and just to look at the document without judging substance, it looks nice, at the very least, and it makes it much easier to pick up than this particular document is. As you said, 13 years ago, graphics really were different. So Melissa hit your point, and she has some ideas on that, too.
I think that the root cause, or one of the root causes of this product several years ago, the main root cause is the fact that there is no integration of the various topics, how they're related to each other. And I think since it was totally absent, this document basically is sort of we have number 2 land use, we put that in. And very rarely, if ever, in this document does anything ever come back to land use. And another graphic example, they're all over the place, is fiscal impacts. You read it, it's detached, has no connection, yet it's of some significance. So and if you take a look at the Westford and a few of the other products, you will see a conscious attempt to cut down with the silos, stop with the silos already, right, to bring things together. So I think if nothing else, we want to be able to come back to certain we hope the consultant, with our help, will come back to, I'll use the term in the plural, certain major themes, whatever they are.
That's a good point. I think there's a narrative element that's maybe lacking. It's very compartmentalized, check a box, versus...
I think that comes from no imagination, to be perfectly blunt.
Hold on one sec. I was negligent as we kick this off, because I do want to say this before we go any further, because we're going to be in the edit mode, so to speak. It's easy to edit other people's work and offer critique. I want to thank the 100-plus people who 13, 14, 15 years ago went through a process that we're going through now, and have given us a basis on which to build. So what comes out of this committee and what we eventually, in 2017, approved through the planning board and present to town meeting is built upon the work of well over 100 people, as I say, 13, 14, 15 years ago. And it's important for us to recognize that work. When we go and we're offering critique, keep in mind that we all have our thoughts at the time, too. We know where we are today, now we're thinking, and realize that folks at that time, too. So, again, as we go through this document, it's more of how do we take what's there so that we have an improved version based on 2015, 16, 17 mindsets, capabilities, et cetera, and realities, without critiquing too much as to the exact substance, if you will. Is that fair?
Up to a point.
Yeah.
So you don't want us pulling a Donald Trump here?
Yeah, I want us to acknowledge that people worked hard and understand that, and 15 years from now, folks have
That's a very good statement you made.
to poke chopsticks in our eyes.
But worth pointing out to PJs that, all these people, myself included, who were part of that, weren't necessarily responsible for
that's
the
the
final
thing.
document, so,
Often-
there were people who were critical of parts of it right off the bat. I mean, and part of it, the word that came up earlier, I think it was you, Michael, said imagination, lack of imagination. That was one of the critiques right off the bat. It was kind of, it was, I don't know, it was structurally sound, it covered all bases, and yet it lacked imagination.
Yeah, I was looking at the consultant, not the people who
Right.
did the work.
Right.
I mean, this is a consultant product,
And it was the single proposal that met the budget,
Right.
so,
the
you
limited,
know.
very limited budget.
But just I would disagree because I liked the document because it's really, for me as an engineer, it's very, it has a clear structure for me. So I could follow everything and I could understand actually Littleton. I could understand Littleton from this document.
It's true.
So I think it's a stepping stone, like it's a base for what we can develop. We don't need to repeat this. I mean, I'm not saying that. It's just that it was really good for me to understand the town.
And I wasn't going to say anything because I write these kinds of RFPs all the time exactly like this.
Right.
As dull as this is, when people that are bidding this stuff, they read every word. I read every word. It's
For a bid document, sure, and if you want looking to learn about the town, true, but
Yeah.
if our aim is to get something new and actionable out of it, that's,
I'm okay.
needs to move
I'm-
beyond that.
I'm okay with that too.
Yeah. But anyway, it's good to get a
Yeah, I mean, I could
Yeah.
understand where it
Yeah.
came from and where they were trying to go to, actually,
Yeah.
from this document.
Yeah, I'm not trying to critique the content, it's more the presentation.
Yeah.
I think the content is sound and it has a solid basis. I just am trying to envision getting others motivated to maybe look at it and work off of it, and it doesn't lend itself to someone who's maybe an ancillary player, wanting to dive into it because it looks like it's
Yeah,
gonna be a
sure.
task.
It's not multimedia.
And that's, while the audience is multifold, truly, who uses the master plan? And that's a subset of that big audience. How does it appeal? So what kind of direction do we help provide to the consultant? Using this certainly as a good basis, and the others that we looked at too, where we can sit down with the consultant as we start putting it all together and saying, here's some things we like, here's some things that we didn't like. And that'll be very helpful. And I understand what you're saying as far as from an engineering perspective. It has a format,
Yeah.
it's structured,
Sure.
almost rigid.
Yeah.
So I get that. But I think Gary raised a good point as to the audience that's actually going to look at it. Not that they won't be engineers in some instances,
Yeah, sure.
professions, but day in and day out, somewhat different disciplines.
Yeah, I agree.
All right.
Okay, Paul, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and if we'll stick to the first of my two suggested approaches to it on a structural level, unless there's anything somebody else wants to add to observations based on the content page, and I think all of that feedback was terrific, I'd like to follow that exercise through each of the chapter first pages, because they likewise have a sub-index for those, and maybe we can take a look at that without getting into the substance yet of any of the sections. Of course, the first thing I noticed right on the contents page too is it doesn't tell you what page to go to
Yes.
to get to any of those. But the first one is fortunately page 1, so under
Because
goals
they're
and
all numbered
Yeah.
independently.
yeah, that's right. Each section is.
Oh, I had that conversation with the consultant.
This won't happen again, right?
Each chapter has its own page number.
Yeah.
And before you get into each subchapter, the only thing in the RFP we did include that one of the things I was real happy with was anything else that comes out of the visioning process. Anything that rises to the top during the visioning process, you can always add
Right.
a section or subsection.
Okay,
We
yeah.
did-
So we should have the flexibility to reflect the visioning process. Yeah. Good point. Okay, so keeping in mind the goals and goals that we vocalized and verbalized in the RFP, here we've got it down to an introduction, which just speaks to the process, a background, which is a background about the town, demographically for the most part, or what makes up the town, and then various goal statements, sub-goal statements. I don't know, I guess if that's where you're going to start it off, then that's a logical place to go with it. But this is more or less an executive summary. Would that good to say? Mark? Yeah.
Pulling the recommendations out of each chapter.
Right. I'd say, even though I would hope to make this a little more accessible to the eye, starting off with an executive summary does seem like a reasonable idea. So-
Yeah, I would certainly think a dedicated exec summary, for sure. But, you're good about goals, too. Probably something that really the vast majority of town boards and committees is the establishing, good goal establishment processes that perhaps back this time it was a little bit different.
Right.
So,
Yeah, a lot of those didn't exist at the time this was done, that have been adopted since by different boards. Yeah.
Policies, for example,
Right.
This came from a policy working group.
Okay. Unless there's anything specific to that chapter or structure of that chapter, page 1 of the land use section is located on page 1, after page 8 of the...
This chapter.
This is almost,
Yeah, it's kind of Groundhog Day. We constantly go back to page 1. Here, again, they get into a historic overview, some land reuse characteristics, land use analysis, description of the zoning regulations, building permit data, inventory of the protected lands and natural resources, build-out analysis, useful information, especially since I think we would probably want to compare how that panned out based on projections. And then not until you get to page 19 is there a strategy for future community development, which has both the land use and an open space concept. Kind of back to your points, Michael, here's the only place, or the first place where I see the two integrated, but again, it's just open space and land use, no other other pieces of it. And then the proposals and recommendations begin on page 24, and let's see how many pages they encompass. What page worth? Okay. And it's a lot of text, and there are some specifics there, village, zone, district, some of the legislative remedies that were common at the time, Community Preservation Act. Still, that's pretty
can I just,
thin broth, if you ask me.
what was interesting to me was the lack of graphics right in the spot where you would think they would be ideal. a picture worth a couple of thousand paragraphs.
Yeah, as opposed to the maps at the back, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
If you want to discourage somebody from understanding, just put the maps in the back.
right. Yeah, so I mean, again, that whole approach, how about the
Let me interrupt one second. So the main point there for us to document is we certainly want graphs, tables, figures, whatever, appropriately spaced or located with the text to which they highlight or they amplify. Now, maybe there's some fold-outs
Right.
that make sense in a paper, but when you start getting to electronic graphics, to be able to click on it and it expands for you on this page. So that'd be another thing too. Obviously, we're going to be doing a lot of things at length.
And also, if you ask folks to put, Gary, you can speak to this, maybe you could speak to it who's an engineer. That is, if you put a picture in, it helps reduce the amount of verbiage that you're trying to plug in
Yep.
to explain.
Another thing I notice on the map specific is that, I should have thought of this earlier, we benefited from having the abilities of the light department, their resources back then, and I don't know whether we're anticipating, bless you, whether the consultant does that again, or whether we might want to rope those folks into the loop sooner rather than later if we have any mapping needs, because they come generally free of charge.
How important is land use in this product for 2017?
You mean between very and very, very?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let me just ask this question then, in terms of if there are 27 pages devoted to this section on land use, fully 18 of them are data on the current state, is that, what does that speak to? Is that filling up the space with who we are at the risk, at the expense of who we want to be, or?
Well, I think they're both important. I think it is, for now, we're looking at something from 13 years ago, and it did kind of a snapshot for us to see kind of what we were doing and why we did what we did at the time. So I think it's context is important. I think context is good.
Mhm.
And so I'm balancing the needs of gathering that, but I think you have to balance that with the going forward, because it's just the background as to where we are and where we want to be. I do think there are some approaches that a contractor could take to include it but not make it part of the body by including some the really dry stuff, putting that as an appendix or something like that. And it says if you want to go back and look at some of these graphics tables that are just more like snapshots, it includes it, embeds it in the document, but doesn't make it part of the necessary narrative. If you want to go dig into it, you can look at it in the back, but doesn't necessarily detract from the volume necessary to get to where which is the planning piece.
Right, and I mean, I would, it's not me, it's Michael, I guess. So to pick up what you said, Gary, I would think a lot of the stuff that is listed here in full detail, even though we like to have the text broken up by graphics, we might be better served just to have a link, or mention, as far as, do you want the full building permit schedule for 20 years? I mean, is that of value as we're doing this, or the list of the,
Because this is you gotta consider this a standalone document,
Mhm.
and the links will get lost and references get lost over time. If we don't want to put it in the body, I think you just stick it in the back.
Mhm.
Technical appendix. That's how I've typically seen a lot of my planning reports written.
Right. I don't doubt that this is similar to the typical. I'm just saying, if we're, as a general observation, if we get 27 pages devoted to land use and 18 of those are a description of current state, as much as that's important for providing context, then it's too much. That's a...
So you're looking for a better balance.
I mean, I'm throwing that out there. Maybe that's not what, Gary raises valid points. I'd like to hear from other people's input on that. Are we looking for a document that weighs more heavily on where we're going, or is weighted 2/3 toward who we are and 1/3 toward where we're going, because that's kind of what this is playing out to be.
Yep.
Thoughts, Mr. Chairman?
Keep talking, I'm listening.
I think where
Take it on
I want to vote for where we're going outweighs way far, by more, than just basically putting equal weight. I don't think this is balanced. This is a political document, not a academic demographic study. This is a political document that's taken from the towns, not ours, it's the towns. And it's where they want to go. So I think I would go like 80% where we want to go and 20% where we're coming from. And by the way, that's why we want to get to where we want to go.
Yeah, I might viscerally agree with you on those percentages, but I think the message to the consultant might be not as specific, but just, our criticism of this is, in looking back at it years later, it's too much about where we were and not enough about where we want to go, on balance. The appropriate amount of context, but I mean, do we really need to know that in the year 1971 there were 50 acres devoted to mining, and that's the kind of crap that's in here, because somebody's trying to justify the $100,000 check they would cash or whatever.
Historical information in the context has to contribute to why you're saying something projecting into the future.
That's my feeling on it. I don't want to expunge historical information, but it ought to stand on its own 2 feet, and it ought to back up the narrative.
Yeah, I don't see it as an historical document. It's a forecasting document.
Okay. Unless someone wants to address anything particularly there, why don't we just jump ahead then to the next section, which would be after page 20, section 27 of section 2 is, amazingly enough, page 1 of housing. And it's similar, my first blush to the last chapter, in that 16 out of, whatever it is, 16 out of 19 pages are background data or documents, including census data, definitions, etc.
On definitions, and I come from a community that the glossary, definitions, acronyms are all at the end of the document. In other words, there's an expected level of understanding for anybody that's going to use the document to begin with. So, for example, affordable housing, they provide a lengthy definition inside the section that should be meat. And I've sort of taken a bit of a segue from you here for a moment, Paul.
No, by all means, I'm looking for that.
But is that something that you would agree that we certainly want, as far as the structure of the document goes, is the glossary, definitions, acronyms, all come at the end of the document?
I would find
Interspersed
that
throughout?
useful. I mean, if we,
The alternative is to footnote, and then all of a sudden
Yeah.
you find yourself
No,
with
no, no.
clutter.
You go crazy with
Agreed. I mean, it's not a,
looking at a prior observation we made, if we're looking for graphs in data to visually engage people, that's fine, but we also want to do that in the context of a narrative. These sort of interjections blow the narrative apart. It's like, okay, we were talking about this whole land use thing. Well, now we're going to throw you off track and give you a dry definition of various housing terms, which apply anywhere or they don't apply everywhere. And then we're going to give you a bunch of data from the census about your town. And unless it's making a specific point, I would say, a lot of that stuff ought to be available, but not,
in the main text.
yeah.
Agreed.
Because what we're getting down here is, of this whole document here, I mean, spoiler alert, but, if we've got like 9 sections and it gets down to there's like 3 pages per section of actual recommendations, there's your real report. The rest of it is what they found in our information and plugged in here.
If I could inject, definitions, why do we need definitions? Why? Unless it's something really specific.
Yeah, I think,
Some have
Right,
legal weight.
right. I think for guidance, we will need some. But I would tend to agree that in an appendix or attachment at the end, that would be good. But I also think specifically for the housing piece of this, we have the benefit of the recent housing production plan that has all the statistics and data, and
Right.
some of it in the main part of that and some of it in independencies. So that's going to be a fairly simple solution to the question of having too much verbiage, too much history.
So probably.
Thanks for bringing that up, because I certainly don't want a document from them that has, pages 1 through 20,
They got a
whatever.
very rudimentary
And then
one before.
Here's the
this.
housing plan, because we just did the housing production plan, boom, and then we go to the next section. That's an appendix.
Right.
The housing production plan, in my mind, is an appendix to the master plan. And the master plan, when it comes to housing, has, using that, some information,
Sure.
and certainly information from many other sources.
Those should be great jumping off points. As noted in the town's previously adopted housing plan, the town, identified XYZ. From that point where we found the following and we're
Yep.
recommending the following. But just to come back and say, as you say, here's your housing plan restated, thanks.
It's
That's
not
a wrap.
space saver. Yeah. Okay, good. Let's say mine then.
Okay, let's see what the proposed recommendations are. Update and maintain statistical data. Okay, thanks.
Are you still doing housing? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just briefly looking over the recommendations. Housing alternatives over 55, a lot of that is, not uncommon things we have tried to address for elderly, the historic area that came up a while ago. What's residential infill?
The latest one.
Just
Oh,
a
yeah.
comment. So I think that in that time they didn't have any real housing planning or something like that. That's why they put this thing here. And actually, one of the graphs is really interesting. It shows that the town data, the population projection chart, actually it's more accurate from the town data than to the government data. So in this document, I could see that the statistics from the town, of course, is better than the statistics from the government that the government was making. So they have a point here in showing,
In terms of the projection?
yeah, in terms of projection.
Okay, there's a big, you talking about the US Government Census?
Yeah, the
Okay.
MISR data.
Okay, the reason for that is if you look at the way the census does it, and we should be alert to this, by the way, because it's going to go tumbling in if the consultant uses it. There's something that the Census Bureau uses, there are specific areas, and in the case of Littleton, there's something called Littleton Common. It's not all of Littleton, it's a piece of Littleton. And they use that to do their, I think they do projections, every 2 years, every 1 year sometimes, depending on what they're looking for. So it's very possible that what you get from that is a snapshot of a snapshot. It's not intended to be granular. And each region, like for example, there's another region that covers Quincy, Cambridge, and something else, bizarre. And if you look at that, you'd never know about, Quincy or Cambridge. You'd get that particular group, but it's used for a different purpose. So I think a lot of the discrepancies, and we have to be alert to that when the consultant arrives on the scene and starts quoting census data. Where is it coming from?
But what I'm saying is that they showed here that discrepancy. That they showed that there is a discrepancy, and
No, there is, no, for the data presented for Littleton Common is correct and accurate. That's not wrong.
oh, okay. So
All right, that is correct. It just doesn't represent all of
so-
Littleton.
okay.
No, I think Renato's point on these graphs in here is there was town census information, and there was also outside information.
Yeah.
And Renato's of the opinion that the town census data is more accurate than the state, federal government level of their projections. Did I get that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that was his point.
Okay.
Your point is 100% valid.
No, I don't have to
Just
be valid,
mutually
it's just
exclusive
that it may, projections on population for Littleton are fun.
Unless there's objections, I'll try to roll through this
Yeah,
exercise
please.
on the remaining sections, maybe with a little more speed, because you're going to see a lot of the same issues come up. After page 19 of the housing section is page 1 of the economic development section. And I think it is fair to say, much to your point, Renato, about the housing, we didn't have a lot of housing plans in place. Myron would remember well, Richard, too, we really hadn't engaged in anything economic development prior to this area, too. But what we get here again is, it's a 12, just over 11-page section, and most of it, up to the last page, is, I guess, starting on page 9, you get into land use concepts, but prior to that, you've got, again, the usual census data, regional employment, and, some history on the development of the community economically, labor force information. Once again, I'd say, that sort of stuff is useful if it's moving a specific narrative, and otherwise, ought to be available to resource somewhere. Recommendations section. Well, we did some of these things.
Which page are you on now, Paul?
10 and 11.
Resources?
Page 10 was the proposals or recommendations.
Yeah. But that's, if you compare that to later economic development plans, this was very much,
Nation stage.
yeah, exactly. There's not much of a plan there at all. All right. After page 12 begins page 1 of natural, historic, and cultural resources. Stop me at any point you want. This probably,
Actually, page number 0.
is it?
That goes from 18 to 11.
Is yours different than mine for some reason?
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe the pages, maybe like a bad binding set, but never mind.
No, I think yours are numbered.
Yeah, no, my page is out of order, that's all.
Natural, historic, and cultural resources breaks down in those 3 subcategories as an introduction, and then they get into natural resources, which is again the kind of a geologic, water resource, flora and fauna type of environmental introduction of the town. The cultural resources, this is one area that I thought particularly they were weak on. It just says we got a cultural council, a library, a park and rec commission. It just, it only engages the community at the level that there are, a handful of organizations.
When you get to something specific, point.
Talk about the page.
Mention the page, please.
All right, pages 6, 7, 8, just strikes my eye there on a, this is kind of veering from the structure to the substance. This, to me, if this is all a consultant comes back with as far as what our cultural resources are, it tells me that there wasn't enough engagement with the community on that score, because it doesn't really talk to what people's cultural interests are, their needs.
Yeah, I was wondering where some of the historic farm stands were, or some of the interesting stores that we have in town, or something like that, or the Springdale Farm wasn't even mentioned in here. I picked up that as a content piece. Again, I don't want to get into content too much, but that's a cultural resource. I'm sorry, it is.
Yep. And it may not have been seen as such back then, but...
Correct.
But I would think specifically handling that cultural piece of it, just, I don't know, do you even remember, Myron, how that was approached? Did we have a subcommittee that lumped the 3 of these together? That's probably how it was handled. In which case, everybody paid attention to the environmental piece. Jumping ahead then to page 12 is where you get into findings, and your findings is Indian Hill adds a cultural feature not typically found in most communities. Well, thank you very much for that.
It's gone.
Huh?
It's gone.
Oh, boy, are they moving?
What do you got?
Oh, gee. I think I heard rumblings of that. But I would consider it a disappointment if our next document comes back and tells us that something we have is nice and charming and wonderful, and that's not a finding to my mind. A finding is, we need to work to preserve items like, so Indian Hill doesn't disappear. We need to have a proactive plan incorporating blah, 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 X, Y, Z. This is none of that here. The historic district was a specific proposal. It was considered, not adopted by the town. You move beyond page 14 of the natural, historic, and cultural resources section to open space and recreation. This, I would say, is, to my eye, more substantive, and probably for the simple reason, or two simple reasons. One is there's a lot of community interest in that specifically, and two, there was an existing open space plan that predated the master plan, right, Byron?
Correct.
Yeah, we were probably in our second or third iteration on open space plan by this point.
Yeah, I don't know the number for
Yeah.
sure, but there was a recent one.
Yeah. So, it's the same structure, and we don't get into proposals and recommendations until page 10 of a, well, it's page 10 of a 17-page document. So now here's, just as a model, ignoring the substance in there, I'd feel more comfortable if we had that kind of balance, where the description of the community, or the status quo is covers at most half of it, with the appropriate details, and I'm not even sure all of this stuff needs to be included. But here's one place in the whole document where there's a pretty meaty list of proposals and recommendations, and I'd say that's not by coincidence. That's because it was one topic that was tackled in detail, independent of or prior to the master plan.
Do you remember the group or committee that was the major source for a lot of this information? Because it seems to have collected...
Well, we had an open space implementation plan committee,
Okay.
and the Conservation Commission was charged with drafting it, right?
All I'm saying,
so.
here's a case where it's evident that lots of people in different silos actually cut them down and started talking to each
Yeah.
other.
Oh, you mean who specifically was involved in the
No, I'm
master
looking
plan?
for a model. I'm
Yeah.
looking for a model that says if this worked, if they were able to
Yeah.
put this together then and now we have almost 3 times more stuff, as it were, that needs to be brought together, I guess.
I'm sure we have on file somewhere, maybe in the library, who was on the various subcommittees, because hopefully a couple of those people are still around and can talk to them.
I was thinking more of the
offhand.
process.
Well, I know, but you have to, in order to find out what the process was, it'd be helpful to talk to one of the people that were actually involved in it. I wasn't involved, in that
I
level
thought
of
maybe
detail.
you're...
Not in that level of detail here.
The complete list of all the people is online.
Yeah, oh yeah, but who was, who I bet was probably involved in this at that time was Sarah Seawood, who's still involved in the...
No, you got names that are still around.
I understand that, but this particular piece here, Rich, the open space piece,
Oh,
make
I
myself
see.
a note.
Yeah.
Oh, her.
Yeah.
I know Linda Cantillon was involved too. I don't know if she's too involved with it.
Sarah's name's not in this.
And this is an instance also where I looked for it, and in this version, couldn't find it, maybe because I was reading too fast, but this is very much related to the Council on Aging because of the change in population, what's involved, and what some folks are looking for. So this is going to cut into yet another area.
Right. I just draw your attention, when I see the first word in all of these sections, whether they happened or not, it's continue, negotiate, encourage, revise, adopt. It's all action items, and you don't get that in every section, so...
It's one of the few that's got it.
Right. All right.
And how many things
That's what a verb, eh?
Huh?
were
That's what a
adopted?
verb.
Right, exactly. All right, moving beyond, unless anybody has anything they want to draw attention to specifically in that section, what is page 17 in the open space part, over to chapter 7, which is page 1 of the public services and facilities. This is where they lump together all the various town departments, police, fire, highway, light, water, schools, library, you name it. And I'm not quite sure what the point is in organizing these items here.
There was a mixture of both infrastructure as well as service.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure what it was supposed to be, but it was interesting that they kind of, I thought infrastructure would be kind of covered under some other
Right.
place, not necessarily on the services that, which I think should be the focus in this section.
Yeah, just the structure of putting it by department just kind of forces us to veer away from, what's gone on before here, where we're kind of looking town-wide and all these things. And as you say, it gets right down into, it's kind of like a capital and budget, future forecast wish list type thing.
I think some of that is reflective of the materials that each department submitted to the consultant. for
Okay.
completion.
That was something I noticed in the introduction portion of that section,
Yep.
which is something I actually liked. The fourth paragraph, page 2 of that section, talks about the development of this section has relied heavily on citizen task force interviews with key personnel working in each branch of local government and
Right.
some informal reviews. I don't think I saw in the introduction or covered, I could have missed it, but a explanation of how they got here. So, which I think would be a very helpful thing, either as an overarching part at the beginning of the document or in each section,
Right.
a process review. We had multiple
Right.
engagement. We met with, so if I don't ask this question 13 years from now, like, how do they do this?
Right.
We know that it was done with good feedback, good consensus, or just a few targeted things. Get to know what was how much consensus was built around it, and understand more of the process. So I thought, at least the fact they covered it, they said that here was good.
Mm-hmm. But I still say, even that, it's a good sign that input was sought, but how useful is this whole section where
If infrastructure is not covered here in terms of age of buildings, the need for
Right.
capital improvements, where else would it be? I guess would be one question.
right. If you go to page 26, which is where you started to get into the proposals and recommendations, you've got a widely divergent list of things here. I mean, you do have sidewalk, and then fire department needs, future traffic planning. It's just kind of all over the map.
Quite aside from the fire department, 52% of the town's budget is the schools.
Right.
And I was wondering whether or not our resident experts would care to comment on... Yeah. Well, you're not the resident expert. No, you do sports. I was wondering if you have any comments that you would make, in light of what your views are about page 16 of that section. I mean, that's just what happens to be where the school department...
Yeah, right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get back.
That's a
one-
great point, Mike. I mean,
It's 52% of our budget, and it's a source of interest to the town.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that, I would have thought that type of thing, but that's true of a lot of the things I see here, that it would have been incorporated more consistently throughout the document. And it's not necessarily the school department. I mean, that's a good example because it is such a big driver of the budget. But in terms of,
Well, how would you like to see it handled differently? Does it make sense to have it in a section like this, or should it be a standalone? Should it be...
I mean, I don't think it should be a standalone. I think it should be incorporated into, what the goal of the master plan document is, just as everything else, public safety, highway, economic development, all the things that we've been talking about, park and recreation, open space, active and passive recreation. I think it's okay to have a section on it because it is such a big driver, as it is to have sections on other aspects of the things that drive the town. No, I understand.
Exclude anything.
Right.
I'm trying to bring it...
But I don't think having it just here by itself, I agree with you, just having it here by itself, that's the only time that it's meant, not the only time, but the most extensive mention of it, I don't think is all that beneficial. I don't mind it being there, but I minded that being the kind of the only time it's focused on.
yeah.
But again, I find that to be kind of a bugaboo about all of it going through here.
Yeah, I was just checking to see where this popped up in our RFP, and, not surprisingly, we did ask for the same thing again, but boy, I'd love to translate the message. And I'd hate to see it laid out the same way by department, and just kind of approach it rather from community needs and where they fit in. I mean, you hear this, just as one example, we have fire department now. Obviously, we have a fire department, but any fire chief will tell you now, if you were starting today, you'd have an ambulance department that had a fire component. Part of that's its historical inheritance. So if we're organizing our whole section on public services and facilities around current existing organizational structure, are we forcing everything to be either you fit into one of these or you don't, And is that really the best way to determine, what's the town's public service needs? There's not a natural home for traffic patterning, so it gets stuck in the police department, which is,
But that sort of makes sense.
well, why not the highway department?
Why not?
Right, but why even have it by department? Why not say we have some transportation needs, we have some...
That's fair also.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
the reason I was landing on the school department is not just because of budgetary reasons, but because of what I strongly suspect that the consultant is going to start discovering or bringing to the town's attention, and that is the demands being put on on the school in the very near future because of the changing nature of the economy, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just, that's why I was asking the question of our resident experts, if they have any concerns about I'd like to see, personally, I'd like to see a standalone section on schools, not just for budgetary reason, because of their, I'll call it, impact.
Not just the impact, but for a lot of folks, if you weren't from Littleton, the reason you came to Littleton is for the schools, right? I mean, or a large factor. At least I hear that. Other factors, the community has a lot to offer, but, a lot of people make their decision to move to Littleton on the basis of the school system, so that's,
Okay. I'm probably taking, okay.
So to me, that's a huge planning category that needs to be...
Especially since in the future, there may be fewer younger couples who have school-age children coming into the town, in fact, much of anywhere, because of a variety of factors. I have no idea if the consultant will go that
The
far.
school-age population is certainly a driver of budget. But a huge component of the driver to the school budget is requirements. Requirements laid out by the federal government, the
Yep.
state government,
Yep.
and then also what we as a town want as an educational system. Now, the thing is, you're going to have to ride the bumps, the waves and the troughs and everything when it comes to the feds and the state as to what comes down the track and figure out how to do it. We just had in last year's budget, help me, Mike, the room that we built off the cafeteria in the high school, Life Skills
Life Skills
Center. Okay, something that wasn't there, and most of us probably never had a Life Skills Center in any school we ever went to, yet it came down as a requirement that the school was to have that. So we put money in from the budget into that. So that's part of that school budget, as you mentioned.
Right.
So those examples. But I think in a master plan is, you capture the spirit and the intent of the town and the people of the town. What do we want our education to be? We're okay if they can get, a $15 wage job, to just use an absurd example. And if the town, that was town consensus, we're okay with that, well, then you direct resources to accomplish that. If we want the kids to have, and we use 21st century skills, is certainly a phrase that we've been using across the educational spectrum. Well, what does that mean? So for them to put that in there, they'd have to, and I'm going to use the word define, but I don't mean in the form of a dictionary definition, but you got to explore what that would mean. So those sorts of things as to when folks are talking and they're trying to capture what we as a town want for, to use the education example, you got to be able to say, how do you get there from here, rather than say, the town should have a good educational system.
Yep. But for one, I'd rather have more pages devoted to that than read about how many mining jobs there were in 1971.
Yeah, that's the only point I was...
There's a way of achieving that without increasing the size of the document.
By addition, by subtraction?
Right.
And the other thing that I think about as I read this, specifically about schools, but as I looked at it, it was also relative, so right now, we're talking about the schools. I would prefer not to talk about the schools. I would prefer to talk about education.
That's fine.
And I would prefer not to talk about the police and fire. I'd prefer to talk about public safety.
Public safety.
Good.
And I would prefer not to talk about the highway department. I'd like to talk about transportation
Right.
and you know, and what other.
Roads, maintenance.
I agree, that's why
The master plan, to me, that's what those things need to be about, not about schools, not about
blowing up the
departments.
department
Right.
segmentation of
Right.
things.
It'll
yeah.
naturally, there'll be times when you're gonna have to cite some of that because it's part of the discussion,
Right.
but it shouldn't be the driver. The driver should be the overarching mission of those, that those departments have to provide.
We added a chapter on governance, which I assume to be more related to how we administer the town, which regards to like
Well,
selectmen body,
it
town
can.
meeting and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
bylaws,
it
whatever.
could, I assume governance could also
Sure.
be how we manage all
Structure
these
the
services
departments,
and stuff like
yeah.
that, and structure. So the structure piece could be under governance.
Yeah.
Take it away from the fact that it's how it's structured. Because I can understand how someone writing this would fall back to this as a safe way of covering it.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
But
But,
not necessarily the town needs it. And speaking of governance, open question, I have no idea if the consultant will reach there, but many towns do ask informally, sometimes it never hits the master plan, is the current form of government working for the size, and I'll use the word complexity of the town today and going forward?
Right.
Now, we have to be careful.
That's why it's in there.
If we identify, if we identify those issues, that requires a whole separate process in and of itself. We won't be doing it through, I mean, there's charter
Right.
committees, there's state
Right.
law that kind of
Oh,
governs how you
no,
go
no,
about that.
I'm with you, but
Yeah.
if the consultant discovers
Yeah.
this,
Oh, I know, I mean, that's why I advocate to put
That's
that
it.
word in there. Yeah.
that's why I think your suggestion, Mike, to look at it,
Yeah.
at getting things done, because that puts this plan more of an action document rather than a compendium.
And the other thing you can think about is you're right, you wouldn't necessarily advocate for a particular solution because it's not our purview, it would be other boards or committees or forms of government. But you could conceivably put in a list of alternatives
Right.
that then can be evaluated, and even if the answer is no, at least now we know why we
Right.
decided not to do it. We evaluated
Yeah,
it,
I'm
we
not to get
decided
ahead
it
of
wasn't
ourselves.
appropriate. Right.
But we could probably say, hey, it's been identified that the community is uncomfortable with its structure of government, and they're looking for a review, blah, 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 and that may involve the following forms, and we recommend the selectmen or whoever take a look at doing that, something like that.
I mean, I think this section, just to kind of wrap this piece up, I think this section could be presented, as Mike referred to, as discussion of the services that we expect of the town, the importance that the town places on those services, and the economic budget drivers that associate those pieces.
Actually, this may be the most important section of the whole master plan.
Well, except that this is the part that we already really have in budget plans, every department. I mean, this Saturday in the same room, we're gonna be going through every department's, I didn't bring the book in with me, I got it in the car.
This is
We have
this is
that.
the 3-inch
Yeah,
binder.
yeah.
Yep.
All right. Jumping from page 28 of the Public Services and Facilities to page 1 of Transportation and Circulation, we are definitely in the home stretch, and I'll promise to stop talking in a moment. But I want to highlight, one thing that caught my eye is like an aha moment of a ray of hope. If you look at that table of contents under Transportation Circulation, you found that yet?
Yep.
Now look at how somebody had the vision to approach one of these topics as journey to work. Rather than, some dry topic, it's actually, well, how does this affect life in the community? What's your journey to work like? Now, boom, if you take that approach to anything, how about shopping in Littleton, or life in the neighborhoods, or rather, taking a topic-based thing on what life is really about, this area, this section rather, is the one part that actually had, I thought, a vision that broke away from established structures and kind of approached it from a, what does life in Littleton entail, and what do we want it to be like? How do you spend your day, how do you spend your weekends in Littleton? How do you want to spend your weekends?
Go to page 4.
Yes.
Go to page 4.
Of which section? That section?
That section. Go to page 4. Now, you tell me after all that excitement in the field, okay?
All right.
All right. Please give me a graph. Please give me a cartoon,
Look, I love the phrase, it just spoke to, these are the things that are gonna catch your attention, say somebody's thinking the right way. About weekends in Littleton, what do kids do? Why would anybody whose kids graduated the school from school stay in Littleton, since some people move out at that point? Why not approach some of those questions that are real-life questions, rather than just saying, well, whatever, no need to repeat what we've already accomplished?
I think your point is excellent, though. We have standard of living, we certainly see, but there's a style of living also.
Yeah.
And is this a document that can help speak to a style of living?
Yeah.
What is it we want to happen next year, 5 years, 10 years, that contributes to the style that we wish to live in the
Yeah.
town? So whether it's fire, public safety, schools, et cetera, it's how are they all contributing to that style?
When the weekend rolls around, do you always go somewhere else? Do you go to a summer house? Do you go to Boston every night? And if so, why? Or if you stay here, what keeps you here? Would you stay here if we had certain other things? As I say, do you intend to make this the community you die? Are you going to end up in West Lawn, or if you're going to move out, why? Is it because I just want to be in the South for the sun, or I want to move away for tax reasons, or why not get into some of those things?
I'm hoping we get this message that you're giving to the consultant, because you're doing something called framing.
Yeah.
And that's a very important part of the getting the information.
Well, as long as Myron wrote some of it down, I don't know if I can remember it twice.
No,
It's
just-
okay. To Mike's point, I've already written a note here, and I was going to wait for the end, but you brought it up now, is that we direct the bidders to LCTV link and watch this meeting. They can
Okay.
or can't, it's their call,
All right.
but tell them that this meeting took
Oh, then they're
place.
just going to say, who's that blowhard in the red
No,
sweater?
they already know who you are. I mean, yeah, you're right.
I remember him from 15 years ago. He's a little gray, a little purple.
That's right.
Name tag's right there.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you guys-
Moving right along.
So if you guys think that's a good idea, that's what I'm going to ask Myron to do, is to direct them to the link once it's up to watch this meeting. It'll be 2
Gee,
hours of their life.
now I'm going to get all self-conscious.
That's good, we should.
Well, when it
Yeah,
came to that section.
Do it within the
that-
context of what's in the RFP.
Right, exactly, right, yeah.
When it came to this section that talked about journey to work, and it listed how many people use the bus, the bicycle, the walk, the railroad, and I looked at it, it was like, to me, it was very, very interesting, but absolutely useless for a master plan.
Right, oh, that's perfectly stated, Richard. Good, interesting data, but the same topic really ought to be, what do people experience and what do they want to experience? What are our challenges and how do we overcome them?
It's interesting to know that I'm lost.
How many of
How
these
do I
people
get
actually,
Yes.
did they walk to work? Did they walk to work, or did they carry their lunch?
They took a taxi
And what's in their
cab.
bag?
They took a taxi cab.
All right,
Do ducks have lips?
Uber.
if you jump ahead past page 15, which would be the implementation part of that section, you'll get to page 1 of implementation. I'm going to suggest we don't cover this ground tonight. That's the final chapter, and that might be a good, since the implementation is a place where, rather than looking at it from the 10,000-foot level, I would hope that we spend some time going through that on a detailed level, and taking, Mr. Chairman, agenda that section just for another night.
On the 8th, when we meet again?
What's that, December 8th? Just to go over, just to kind of look at,
Right, Myron? Yeah, December 8th. What do
Yeah.
you folks think?
That sounds good to me. Vote to adjourn.
All right.
yeah.
Everybody in agreement on that?
Were you thinking something sooner versus later, Paul? Say
Say that again?
I thought maybe you might be thinking something like
wanna go-
more after we've got the conduct on board or something.
Well, I mean, that part wasn't, didn't really factor into my thought. Just that we've spent enough time, and I don't want to beat people over the head with it, but I would like to, I think each of these specific proposals, it'd be worth it to look at. It's like, all right, what was being
Oh, I see what you
suggested?
mean.
Did we do it?
Okay.
If not, why didn't we do it? If we did it work out? And there's not, it's only, 4 pages worth, so that's, it won't take forever to go through that in detail, and I think the institutional memory of Myron and Richard and whoever else will remember a lot of that stuff.
In regard to that, there's a lesson to be learned for us, maybe for the future, which is on the chart on page 3 of that section.
Yep.
That section.
Yep.
And if you look at it, this is the fun part. And
Yep.
this is where, if we do have a discussion about implementation, I hope we have some knowledge by that time. If you look at the priority list, just look at a priority list, I find that this, to me, and it continues on, okay? It continues on,
Yeah.
priority,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
There's hardly anything that gets left out.
Right.
Everything there's lots of wants. lots of ones, okay? And that,
They were real upbeat at the end of this process.
okay, and this tells me my concern here would be, I'm hoping that the next plan finds a better way to interact with the public, to basically get at the one or two or three core things that really
Yeah.
get the public interested.
I don't want to, jump ahead to our December 8th discussion, but I think this is the part of the document where we really fell down more than anything.
That's every.
Huh?
This chapter I hated.
Yes, okay, good. And I'll make my last comment. There is a final chapter, interestingly enough, Mike, especially since you spoke to including it in the RFP, fiscal impacts, which is like, aha! And then you look at it, and it really isn't anything about fiscal impacts. It's just, it's a snapshot of what the revenues versus expenditures were at that particular year.
No, it has to do with, actually, it has to do with this is a big...
And the breakdown of the tax bill.
This to me was something given to folks who were worried about too much housing.
Recollection.
And this had to do with, this is a particular analysis of how much it costs when you put up a residence, and how much services cost there is to the town when you do it.
Fine, but I think what I'm hoping to get back when we included that on the list this time around is some ballpark figures of what some of these things will cost and what rate of
All the way
growth,
through,
what rate of
yes.
growth we're gonna need to sustain certain
Yeah.
services, that sort of thing. Anyway. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got through as much as I was hoping to,
As much as we desired.
and then some probably.
Excellent. No, thank you very much, Paul. I think you handled that very well, so appreciate it. Okay, so folks, Paul took us through roughly half the document, actually even more than half the document. So if you had an opportunity to peruse the first half, take the opportunity to read the second half, since we all seem to be in agreement that that's the true meat, and that's where we want to direct some things. On that thought, and we talked about success in achieving some of the stated goals and objectives in this document. Is it to our benefit, and more importantly to the town's benefit, that maybe we establish a subcommittee that researches a little bit, and this rabbit hole could go way too deep, so bear with me for a moment. And it almost becomes a scorecard, for lack of a better phrase at the moment. I certainly don't want it to be. But things that were in this document that were recommended and we didn't get there. And you can't necessarily say why we didn't get there, because it could be a multitude of reasons. But at the very least, identify it. Do we serve a purpose by doing something like that?
Yes, we do, absolutely. So we don't...
Like the first volunteer.
Yeah.
Sincerely. Couple, 3 people? Or does everybody want to take a hack and we compile a list?
Let's all take a hack at it, because we'll all look at it in different perspectives and from different timeframes.
If we're going to be kind of going through that exercise on the 8th, why don't we do that as a group first and see if we want to, if that's not successful in getting at where you think we ought to be going, maybe then we just sign a subcommittee to look at it.
Okay, because as I said, I don't want to go down every rabbit hole.
Right.
Be here for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Broad brush, you brought up a couple points tonight. I said pretty much everybody has, as to where we would have liked to see something a little bit different happen. And it could just be as simple as resources are never available, whether it's people, time, or money. Okay, to Paul's suggestion, I think that makes good sense, because that'll keep us from going down the rabbit hole by being together that way. All right? Okay. So tonight, we did approve minutes. We talked about the selection subcommittee and extending the date to the 30th, contingent upon Bonnie and any other issue that could be there. The RP update, we did that, and we got through more than half of this document tonight, so thank you, Paul. Is there anything else folks want to bring up this evening? No.
Motion to adjourn?
Well, hold on, we asked the public.
Oh.
Where's Bob
Second
Rome?
motion.
He's supposed to be here.
Please scan the room. With the camera.
Yeah.
I want the folks at home to see this room. Okay, people on television land, count the number of folks up here. Some of us you may like, some of us you might not like. But we're making some work towards helping decisions in town that affect you all. We're asking for your participation is the reason for this. I'll be candid, it's a little disappointing that we don't have it yet, and perhaps maybe it's early in the process, and that's the reason. But please consider coming on out, offering your thoughts on this, because it's all of our town. And that's what this master plan is going to be about. Can't reiterate it often enough. It's your plan, not ours. Not the planning board, not the selectmen, your plan. All right, soapbox time done. Thank you. Take a motion to adjourn. So moved.
So moved.
Is everyone seconded?
Second.
Motion made, second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, folks.
Good.